Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I'd been needing a break for a while. 40-hour weeks had turned into 60, and the thought of answering one more email made my left eye twitch. So I booked a solo cruise leaving from Miami, a last-minute deal for a 7-day trip through the Caribbean. I didn't care about the destinations, I just wanted to disconnect. No meetings, no expectations. Just ocean air and a cabin where no one knew my name. I didn't tell many people I was going. Just my sister and a coworker I trusted to cover for me. I boarded with a book, noise-canceling headphones, and zero plans. The cabin they assigned me was small but decent. Porthole view, compact bed, and a bathroom that looked like it had been updated within the last decade. The bathroom door was one of those stiff, heavy types that swing inward, like in older hotels. From the first night, though, I noticed something weird. Around 3:15 a.m., the door would creak open slowly. Not swing or fly open, just ease itself open like someone was deliberately pushing it inch by inch. I assumed the ship's motion was nudging it, but the door was thick, and the latch clicked shut every time I used it. Still, I started wedging a towel at the base before going to bed. Didn't help. The second night it happened again, same time, somewhere between 3:10 and 3:20. I double-checked the towel, still there, no drift in the room. The door moved slowly, soundlessly, like it was being eased open by an invisible hand. No wind, no engine rumble, just that quiet squeak and the faintest shift in air pressure when it cracked open. By the third night, I was feeling more annoyed than creeped out. I called down to maintenance and asked if they could check the hinges or the ship's leveling. A guy named Ricardo came up the next morning, ran a quick check, and told me everything was solid. "This door won't open on its own, man." "It's too stiff," he said, giving it a little shove. "If anything, it should stay shut." I started recording with my phone, propped up on a coffee mug on the desk across the room, pointed straight at the bathroom door. That night, I left the towel again, clicked the door shut hard, and hit record around 3 a.m. I woke up at 6 and went straight for the phone, half expecting to see nothing but shadows or a slow swing. Instead, at 3:16, the door creaked open. Slow, deliberate. But it wasn't the door that made me freeze. It was the mirror. In the reflection, for just a second, a figure appeared behind where I was supposed to be lying. A man. Tall, thin, wearing what looked like a formal suit. But something about him was wrong. His arms were too long, just barely, and his head was tilted like it didn't sit right on his neck. I sat there staring at my phone for what felt like an hour. I scrubbed back and forth through the footage, trying to convince myself I was misinterpreting a shadow, or maybe catching a weird reflection from the TV. But the TV was off. Lights were out. The only source of illumination was the hallway light spilling faintly through the crack under the door. I paused the video on the exact frame where the figure stood behind me. He wasn't blurry. He was too clear. The mirror caught him like he belonged in that room. Except he wasn't there. I remember jumping up from the bed, turning on every light in the cabin, and scanning the entire space. There was nothing. No one. Just silence and the sound of my heart thudding in my chest. I went straight to security. I didn't say ghost or apparition or anything like that. I just told them someone might have been in my cabin. I showed the video to a crew member at the security desk, a young guy named Josh who looked like he didn't get paid enough to deal with this kind of stuff. He watched the clip, leaned forward at the moment the door opened, and then the video glitched. Right at 3:16, the screen went black for about 2 seconds, and when it came back, it had skipped the whole segment. Josh asked me to send the file to their internal system. I did, but when they opened it on their terminal, the clip was corrupted. Wouldn't play past the door opening. Might have been a file transfer issue, he said, but I could tell he didn't believe that. Later that night, I got a call from the front desk asking if they could send someone up to check on my room. Some kind of internal audit or maintenance check, they said. I agreed, though it felt unnecessary. About an hour later, a woman from housekeeping knocked, clipboard in hand, polite but distant. Her name tag said Margot. She didn't step all the way in, just looked around the room, peeked into the bathroom, and started making notes. I asked her point blank if anyone had ever mentioned weird stuff in this cabin. She hesitated, just slightly, and then said, "No, sir. Not that I'm aware of," in that rehearsed tone that tells you they've absolutely heard things before. Before she left, she muttered, almost too quietly, "This room stayed empty for a while after the accident, but I don't know details." I didn't let it go. I went to the passenger desk the next morning and asked to see any previous reports or notes for the cabin. They looked surprised. Then the woman behind the desk asked for my room number, typed it in, and her face changed. Subtly. Like she was trying to keep neutral but couldn't quite do it. "Unfortunately, I can't share guest records," she said. I asked if she could just confirm if there'd been an incident in the room. She typed again, frowned, and said, "The system shows this room was unoccupied for almost 11 months prior to your check-in." She said it like that was normal. Almost a year. No explanation. I asked why. She just said, "I'm not authorized to discuss that," and turned back to her screen. After that conversation, I couldn't relax in the cabin anymore. Even with the lights on, even with the door blocked, I kept catching myself looking toward the mirror. Not at the door, the mirror. Like my brain had decided that's where the danger came from. I didn't sleep much the next night. Every little creak from the ship sounded like footsteps. At one point, I swear I heard someone breathe. Not snore, not sigh. Just one deep breath right behind me. I spun around, heart racing, and of course there was no one. But the bathroom door was cracked open again. I had wedged a damn shoe under it this time. Didn't matter. I seriously considered leaving the cruise early at the next port, but I didn't want to explain why. So instead, I asked to change cabins. I didn't make a big deal, just said I was having trouble sleeping. The woman at the desk didn't ask any questions. She just nodded, typed something, and reassigned me 2 decks up. The new room was slightly smaller, no porthole, but the bathroom door stayed shut. Every single night. Not a sound, not a creak, not even once. I stayed there for the last 3 nights and never experienced anything weird. I didn't try to record anything either. I just wanted to make it to the end of the trip in one piece. When I got home, I tried to recover the video. I'd uploaded it to my cloud before showing it to security, and I hoped the original file might still be intact. It wasn't. The clip still cut out exactly at 3:16, just as the door creaked open and the figure appeared. I ran it through 2 recovery programs. Nothing worked. It was like the file had been overwritten mid-frame. I gave up after that. I still have the phone, and I haven't deleted the video. But I don't watch it anymore. It's like it wants to be forgotten somehow. Every time I open that folder, my phone glitches or freezes just for a second. Enough to make me close it. I don't claim to know what happened in that room. Maybe there's a rational explanation buried somewhere in a report the staff won't share. Or maybe I was just the unlucky guy who got booked into a cabin with something left behind. Someone left behind. But here's the part I can't shake. That last morning, as I was checking out and wheeling my luggage toward the elevators, I passed Margot again. She didn't smile, didn't say hi. She just looked at me and said, under her breath, like it wasn't meant for me at all, "You shouldn't have recorded it." I took that cruise last spring, about 2 months after my divorce was finalized. My friends tried to talk me into some girls' trip to Vegas, but I wasn't in the mood for loud crowds or having to pretend I was enjoying myself. The cruise sounded quieter, and honestly, I just needed a few days to float in my own thoughts with no one needing anything from me. It was one of those mid-tier lines. Not cheap, not luxury either, but my cabin had a balcony, and I thought the ocean might help me breathe again. I spent the first couple days reading, drinking 2 sweet cocktails, and walking the deck alone just after sunrise. It was the first time in years I felt invisible, in a way that was actually peaceful. I found the casino on the third night. I hadn't planned to gamble at all. I just followed the sound of faint bells and jazzy music after dinner. It was mostly empty, just a few people with their heads down at the machines and 2 staff behind the cash counter. One of them, a guy with a thick beard and a crooked bow tie, nodded at me when I walked in. He had that kind of face that seemed friendly by default, soft lines, tired eyes, like someone who'd been working long hours without complaint. I didn't pay him much attention at the time. I sat at a penny slot near the back and just started mindlessly pressing buttons, zoning out to the blinking lights. I'm not sure how long I sat there, but I know it wasn't more than 30 minutes before I hit something big. The machine lit up like a carnival ride and spilled out a mess of credits that I hadn't even realized I'd earned. I remember the strange high of it, like I hadn't just won money, but permission to enjoy something for once. That same bearded staff member walked over and congratulated me. He asked if I wanted a photo with the machine for the winner's wall. I laughed and said no thanks. He didn't push, just nodded again and said, "Lucky night." I think that's when I started to notice something strange in his eyes. Not threatening exactly, more like he already knew something I didn't. Back in my cabin, I ordered a bottle of white wine through the app and sat on the balcony for a while, letting the salt air soak into my skin. I remember undressing in front of the mirror without giving it a second thought. I wasn't used to being alone, to having a space where no one was watching. At least that's what I believed. I fell asleep with the curtains half open and the TV on some rerun of a courtroom show. Nothing about the night felt unusual, until I woke up the next morning and saw the envelope. Someone had slipped it under my door. No name, no markings, just a plain white envelope with a single photo inside. And the moment I saw it, I felt the air drain right out of my chest. I stared at the photo for a long time before I could even process what I was looking at. It was a still frame, printed on glossy paper, clearly taken from a camera feed. The angle was just slightly above eye level, a corner of the room I never paid much attention to, but what got me was what it showed. Me, the night before, halfway undressed, unhooking my bra, totally unaware. The lighting matched exactly, dim, yellowish, the flicker of the TV reflecting faintly on my back. My heart was thudding so loud I could barely hear anything else. It wasn't just creepy, it felt surgical. Someone had chosen that moment on purpose. I tore the room apart looking for a camera. The first thing I thought was that maybe I'd been hacked somehow, like those horror stories where people hide micro cameras in alarm clocks or smoke detectors. I climbed on the chair and examined every corner of the ceiling. The only thing remotely electronic up there was a black dome in the far corner. I'd seen it when I checked in and assumed it was a motion detector or something for maintenance. But now that I was looking at it with different eyes, I could see the faint red ring around the lens. It was a camera, one that no one had mentioned, one that definitely wasn't supposed to be active inside a private cabin. I went down to guest services trying to stay calm, holding the envelope tight against my chest. The woman at the desk smiled like she was used to complaints about towels and drink charges, not this. When I asked her about the camera in my room, her expression barely shifted. She said all cabins had a dome for maintenance monitoring, but they weren't active and couldn't record. I asked her, point blank, if she was sure. I even held up the photo. That's when her face changed, not with shock and with hesitation, like someone trying to calculate what they were allowed to say out loud. She asked me to wait and disappeared into a door behind the counter without another word. A man in a dark blazer came out instead. He introduced himself as Eric, part of the security team, and asked if I could step into a side office to clarify the situation. The way he said it made me feel like I was the one under investigation. The office was windowless and freezing cold, and Eric sat across from me with a corporate half-smile that never quite reached his eyes. I laid the photo on the table. He didn't touch it, just looked at it for a few seconds too long. Then he asked when I'd found it, what time I went to bed, if I'd had anyone in my room with me. That last question made my stomach turn. I asked him directly if someone on the ship had access to cabin cameras. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood up, walked to a small cabinet and pulled out a plain gray folder. When he placed it in front of me, my hands actually shook. Inside the folder were 6 photos, all printed the same way. Different cabins, different women. Some were brushing their teeth. One was crying into a towel. Another was asleep with her back exposed, a clear outline of her bra strap visible. None of the women were posing. None of them knew they were being watched. Eric didn't say where the photos came from. He just quietly admitted that there had been a recent technical issue involving the internal security system. Apparently, someone had found a way to reroute a handful of the internal feed channels, including certain staff-monitored cameras, to record rather than simply monitor. It had been going on for weeks, maybe longer. He wouldn't say it directly, but it was obvious the culprit was someone working on board, someone with high-level access. I asked him if it was the casino attendant, the bearded guy in the bow tie. Eric didn't confirm it, but the way he looked down at the folder told me I'd hit a nerve. He did say that someone had already been removed from staff duties and that legal steps were being taken, but everything he said sounded like it had been rehearsed by lawyers. When I asked if they'd contacted the women in the other photos, he said yes, but from the look in his eyes I could tell he was lying. I was probably the first to make noise. The envelope under my door wasn't a warning. It was a mistake. They offered me compensation, of course, a refund, plus credit for another cruise, which I laughed at like it was a punchline. I signed an NDA in that cold little office because I just wanted to get off that ship. I flew home the next day, still shaking every time I caught my reflection. For weeks, I kept my bedroom curtains drawn and unplugged anything in the room that had a lens. My therapist told me I'd developed situational paranoia, but honestly, it felt more like I'd seen too much of the truth. We all think we're safe in those small, private rituals, showering, dressing, crying when no one's around. But that cruise taught me how thin the walls really are. I still have the photo. I keep it in a locked drawer, folded in half. Not because I want to remember it, but because I'm terrified of forgetting. They tried to make it all disappear with paperwork and apologies, but someone watched me when I was most unguarded. Someone I looked right in the eye and thanked for helping me. And I have no idea how many others he watched, or what he did with what he saw. I never took that second cruise. I never even boarded another ship. And to this day, every time I enter a hotel room or a rental, I scan the ceiling corners before I even set down my bag. You never really go back to normal after learning you were the show. And someone out there still might have your performance on file. I hadn't planned on taking that cruise. It was actually my mom's idea. She'd found a last-minute deal online and thought it'd be the perfect way for us to spend some time together before the summer got too hectic. I was between jobs, single again after a short-lived situationship, and honestly just in need of a break from my apartment. So I said yes. The ship left from Galveston and was headed for a 7-day loop through the Gulf, with stops in Cozumel and Roatan. Nothing wild, just beaches, buffets, and time to zone out. Our cabin was tucked away at the very end of one of those long, silent hallways that barely saw any foot traffic. Right next to our room was a door labeled Crew Only, which led to a narrow stairwell the guests weren't allowed to use. I remember thinking the location was perfect. Quiet, out of the way, no one slamming doors in the middle of the night. The walls were this odd beige color, with small sconces every few feet that cast a warm, low light. It smelled faintly of sea salt and industrial cleaner. Most nights, I fell asleep easily after dinner and drinks. But by the third night, I started waking up around the same time, always a few minutes past 2 a.m. It started with footsteps. Not loud, but distinct. The sharp, rhythmic click of someone walking in heels. Not the clunky kind you hear on a theater stage. This was subtler, measured, precise. The sound came from far down the corridor and always approached slowly, as if the person was walking with purpose, but not in a hurry. And it always stopped right in front of our door, not next to it, not across the hall, our door. The first time I heard it, I held my breath and listened, expecting a knock or maybe a jingle of keys. But nothing happened. Just silence. When I finally got the nerve to check through the peephole, no one was there. By the fourth night, it became routine. I'd wake up without fail at the same time, heart racing before I even opened my eyes. The footsteps would follow, always the same pattern, the same pacing, the same stop. Right at our door. I tried to tell myself it was a crew member, maybe someone on a weird shift. But why would anyone be walking alone in heels down a hallway that led nowhere except to our cabin and a locked staff stairwell? One night, I even stayed up with the lights off, phone in hand, determined to catch whoever it was. The second I heard the first step, I jumped up and looked through the peephole. Nothing. Just the hallway, empty and still, with that artificial light buzzing faintly from the ceiling. On the fifth night, I didn't wait. The second those footsteps reached the spot in front of our door, I yanked it open. I don't know what I expected. A startled crew member, maybe? But instead, I caught the tail end of a figure turning the corner at the far end of the hallway, just before the door to the stairwell swung shut behind her. She was wearing a long navy blue uniform, almost like what flight attendants used to wear in old commercials. It had this stiff, vintage-looking collar and a little cap pinned neatly to her dark hair. The outfit looked like it belonged in a museum. But more than that, there was something wrong with how she moved. Too stiff, too smooth, like she was gliding instead of walking. I stood frozen in the doorway for a few seconds, listening. The click of her heels was gone, swallowed by the metal door to the stairwell. I could hear the engines humming below us, the faint sound of a television from another room, but nothing else. My mom stirred behind me, groggy, asking what I was doing up. I told her someone was wandering the halls and she mumbled something about security before rolling over. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. First thing the next morning, I went to the guest services desk and described what I saw. The woman behind the counter looked confused when I mentioned the uniform. She said no one on staff wore anything remotely like that, especially not at night. I could tell she thought I was either mistaken or messing with her. Back in the room, I couldn't stop thinking about the uniform. There was something so deliberate about it, like it had meaning. I tried Googling vintage cruise line uniforms, but didn't find anything that matched what I saw. The closest thing was an old 80s advertisement for a now-defunct cruise company, but even that wasn't quite right. Later that evening, I passed a real staff member near the dining hall and asked casually about the stairwell next to our cabin. He gave me this weird look and said it hadn't been in use for years. According to him, it led to an old service route that had been sealed off on the lower decks during a remodel. That made no sense. The door still worked. I heard it close. I saw her use it. On our last day, my mom was packing up when she pulled out an old family photo album from her suitcase. She said she thought I'd like to see pictures from our very first cruise, back in the 90s, when I was too little to remember. I was flipping through the plastic-covered pages, laughing at her haircut and my dad's mustache, when my hand stopped. In one of the photos, taken on the ship's deck in 1994, I saw it. A blurry figure in the background, halfway behind a lifeboat standing dead still. The outline of a long navy blue skirt, a stiff collared blouse, a small hat tilted over dark hair. She wasn't smiling, wasn't even looking at the camera, just standing there in the middle of a sunny afternoon, staring sideways at nothing. I didn't say anything at first. I just kept staring at the photo like it was going to shift or change if I blinked. My mom leaned over, trying to see what I was looking at, and I asked her casually, "Do you remember this woman?" She squinted, shrugged, and said it was probably just a passenger in the background. I nodded like I agreed, but inside I was ice. I knew what I'd seen. The lines of that uniform, the strange hat, even the posture. It was the same woman from the hallway. And that photo was taken decades ago, on a completely different cruise ship. The dates in the corner read July 1994. I was 3 years old. That night, back at home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I tried every rational explanation. Maybe the ship reused old staff uniforms for themed nights. Maybe I misremembered what I saw. But the way she stopped at our door, how she disappeared through a stairwell that supposedly didn't lead anywhere, and now this photo, it didn't add up. The vibe I got from her, this isn't going to make sense, but it wasn't threatening, just intentional, like she was checking something, or someone. I started to wonder if other guests had ever seen her too, but when I looked online, I couldn't find a single mention. A few days later, I emailed the cruise line's customer service, not really expecting a reply. I described the uniform and attached a scan of the photo from 1994. They got back to me 2 weeks later with a short message saying they had no records of uniforms like the one described, and that the staff stairwell next to our old cabin had been permanently sealed after a fire drill malfunction in the early 2000s. No one should have had access to it from the guest floor. No explanation, no follow-up. Just that. I read the email a dozen times, trying to squeeze more meaning out of it than there was. I still have the photo. It's in a drawer next to my bed, and sometimes I take it out and just stare at that small figure in the background. She's blurry, but not enough to be a trick of the light. I don't know what she wanted or why she kept stopping by our door, but I know what I saw. And ever since that night, I've had this lingering feeling that she knew I saw her too, like maybe for whatever reason I was supposed to. I started working night shifts as a janitor on cruise ships about a year after my ex-wife left. My son, Ethan, was 6 at the time, and my sister watched him whenever I was away. It wasn't ideal, but the job paid better than anything I could find back home in Tampa. The hours were brutal, and the days blurred together, but I made it work. I kept to myself mostly, pushing the mop cart through endless corridors, trying to keep my mind busy with podcasts and the occasional conversation with the kitchen crew during their smoke breaks. The job came with this strange kind of silence, not peace, just quiet, the kind that made you feel like you were always being watched, even when you weren't. It was on the 4th day of a 10-day Caribbean route when I met the guy. He was sitting alone near the back of the Lido deck late one night, long after most guests had gone to bed. I was emptying trash bins when he called out to me, said something about how the ocean at night made him feel small. His name was Drew, thin, pale, early 40s maybe, with deep circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept in a week. There was something about the way he talked, soft, like every word had to sneak past some invisible barrier in his throat. I figured he was just lonely. Happens a lot on these ships. People pay thousands to escape their lives only to end up more isolated than ever. Over the next couple nights I'd see him again, always late, always alone, sitting on the same bench near the back railing. We'd talk for a few minutes each time. Just small stuff. He asked about the ship, my schedule, how long I'd been doing this. Said he was a freelance writer working on a book about isolation at sea. I didn't think twice about it. Hell, it was nice to have someone to talk to who wasn't drunk or barking orders. He even joked about how I must have had access to every locked door on board. I laughed it off, told him the master badge was the only useful part of the job. The way he smiled at that, I should have picked up on something, but I didn't. 3 days later, Drew wasn't on the deck, or the next night. I just figured he got off at the last port. But when I clocked in for my shift that night, I noticed something immediately. My locker was slightly open. I always double-check it. Always. Inside, my uniform jacket was gone. So was my access badge, the master one that opens nearly every non-passenger door on the ship. I felt my stomach drop. I checked with security, but they brushed me off, said it was probably a mistake. I was stuck doing the rest of the shift without access, and I felt naked without that badge. Every door I passed, every hallway I walked, it all felt different now, like the walls were leaning in just a little more than usual. The weirdness really kicked in the following night. There was a report of a break-in at the onboard jewelry boutique, No cameras near the storage room, but someone had used a master-level badge to get through 2 secured doors. Nothing huge was taken, but the timing couldn't have been worse. I got pulled aside by security, 2 guys I'd seen around but barely spoken to. They asked about my badge, my movements, whether I'd loaned my uniform to anyone. I told them the truth. It was stolen. They gave each other this look, like they'd heard that 1,000 times before, and said they'd review footage. That phrase stuck with me. Not "we'll help you" or "let's get to the bottom of this," just "we'll review footage." For a day or 2, I was under this weird cloud. Everyone in the crew avoided me. The chef who used to offer me leftover pastries stopped talking. My supervisor gave me a new ID but with restricted access. It was humiliating. Then 2 nights later, someone tried to swipe into the engine room. Security caught it just in time. Whoever it was had the right badge but took off when the door wouldn't open. That's when they finally took the situation seriously. They brought me into the surveillance room and showed me the footage. At first, all I saw was a tall man in a janitor uniform walking down D deck, like he belonged there. Then he turned toward the camera for just a second, and my whole body locked up. It was Drew. He was wearing my uniform. My badge was clipped to the front. He had even shaved to look more like me. Same dark cap pulled low, same walk. If I hadn't known him, I would have thought it was me. I was staring at my own shadow. One of the guards muttered something like, "He must have planned this," but I couldn't focus. My heart was beating so hard it felt like my eardrums were pulsing with it. They froze the footage on his face, and all I could say was, "That's not me." The head of security leaned in, looked at me for a long time, then said, "He's not in the system. No room, no booking, no ID." It didn't make sense. He had a room key. I'd seen it. We talked for days. How does someone live on a ship without being on the manifest? The next morning, the ship docked in Puerto Rico. The security team swept the ship, checking every room, every hallway. Nothing. Drew, or whoever he really was gone. Vanished. His room had been cleaned out. No clothes, no suitcase, no notebook, nothing. Just an empty mug on the balcony table and a folded towel on the bed like he'd followed turn-down service protocol himself. It was like he'd never existed, except he'd worn my name, my badge, my uniform, and walked around pretending to be me. And for a few minutes, he'd gotten away with it. After that, things never really went back to normal. I finished that cruise rotation, but I kept to myself more than ever. I didn't trust anyone. I didn't even trust my own memory. I kept running through every conversation I'd had with him, trying to figure out if he'd dropped clues, if he'd said something that should have tipped me off. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt like he had studied me. Not just talked to me, studied me. My posture, my schedule, my voice. I'd never had anyone pay that much attention to me before, and the thought of it made my stomach turn. A few weeks after I got back to Florida, I received a letter from the Department of Motor Vehicles. It said my license had been suspended due to a DUI arrest in Oregon. I've never even been to Oregon. I thought it was a scam at first, until I called the number and they read out my full name, my date of birth, and my social security number. I went cold. I hung up and called the sheriff's office in that county. They confirmed someone had been arrested under my name. The mugshot? Blurry, low light, but it looked a hell of a lot like Drew or whatever his real name was. I spent the next few months working with a lawyer, trying to clear everything up. The identity theft screwed with my taxes, my credit, even my ability to renew my work clearance. I had to carry around notarized letters just to explain who I was. But the thing that still messes with me the most isn't the paperwork. It's the fact that someone lived as me, walked around in my skin, so to speak. He didn't just steal my ID. He slipped into my life like it was a costume, and he disappeared just as easily. No trail, no motive, no explanation, just vanished like a ghost. I still work cruise ships sometimes. I switch companies every few contracts. I keep my badge on a chain under my uniform now, and I check my locker 3 times before each shift. But every now and then, usually when I'm staring out at the open water at night, I wonder if he's still out there. boarding some other ship. Watching someone else, slipping into a new name, a new face, and I wonder if I was just one stop on his route. Just another uniform to borrow. I haven't seen him since, but I don't think I've seen the last of him either. My wife Brooke and I had been married for exactly 9 days when we boarded the cruise. It was a short getaway, 5 nights along the Eastern Caribbean, something we booked last minute using a honeymoon gift card. At the time, we were living out of a cramped 1-bedroom in Tampa, juggling work and wedding stress. So the idea of no cooking, no emails, and just ocean air was perfect. We got a mid-tier cabin with a little balcony and were placed on deck 7 starboard side. It wasn't luxurious, but it felt like a world away from everything. Our neighbors were quiet, or so we thought. The first night, we met the guy in the next cabin over. He was already standing in the hallway when we got there, leaning on the railing, drink in hand, and wearing a beige windbreaker zipped up to his chin. Said his name was Richard, but everyone calls me Rick. He was polite enough, maybe late 60s, slightly hunched with watery blue eyes and the kind of smile that didn't quite reach them. I remember he kept calling Brooke young lady, even after she introduced herself by name. We chalked it up to harmless boomer charm. He told us he'd been on a few dozen cruises over the years and offered unsolicited tips about what to avoid at the buffet. It felt like small talk, but I remember getting the sense he wanted to linger too long. That night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of pacing. Not footsteps above or below, but right on the other side of our wall. The rhythm was steady, 5 or 6 steps, then stop, then again. At first, I thought Rick couldn't sleep, but it went on for over an hour. Then came the tapping. It was faint but persistent, like someone using the tip of a fingernail against the wall, or maybe the metal vent that connected our rooms. Brooke was already awake, staring at the ceiling, and whispered, "Do you hear that too?" We didn't say much else. Eventually the sound stopped, and we both drifted back to sleep with the balcony door cracked open for air. The next day we saw Rick again. He was out early, reading a paperback on a deck chair just outside his cabin. He greeted us with that same frozen smile and asked if we'd tried the French toast at the buffet. Brooke, ever the polite one, smiled and said we had. I noticed his door was slightly open behind him, not wide, just barely ajar, like he hadn't let it close all the way. I remember thinking it was odd because the cabin doors lock automatically unless you physically wedge them. But again, I said nothing. We went about our day, pool, trivia game, lunch on the upper deck, and didn't think much about it until that night. That night the noises started again, but earlier this time, around 11:30 p.m. We were just settling into bed after walking the promenade when we heard it. First the pacing again, but heavier, quicker. Then the tapping. Then something new. Whispers. Not distinct words, but a hushed, breathy murmur, like someone speaking directly into a wall. Brooke sat up and stared at the vent that connected our rooms. I got up and pressed my ear to it. I couldn't make out what was being said, but it was definitely a voice. I knocked, just once, firm enough to be heard, and everything went silent. Not a shuffle, not a creak, just stillness, like whoever was on the other side had been waiting for us to react. We reported it to a crew member the next morning, a guy named Malik who worked our floor. He gave us a sympathetic look and said, "Cabin walls are thin, could be snoring or a TV," but he jotted something down on a clipboard and promised to check in later. That afternoon, while walking back from the pool, Brooke stopped dead in the hallway. Folded neatly on the railing that divided our room from Rick's was a pair of her underwear, a specific black and pink set she'd packed but hadn't worn. She picked it up like it was radioactive, and I watched the color drain from her face. It was folded too perfectly, creased at the waistband, like it had been laid out intentionally. We both looked at Rick's door. Closed. Dead silent. We didn't sleep much that night. Brooke insisted on keeping the lights on. I pushed the chair from the vanity under the door handle like that would help. Around 3 a.m., I thought I heard the faintest sound of our doorknob moving. Not turning, just a soft click like pressure being tested from the outside. When I moved toward it, everything went quiet again. We didn't open the door. We just sat there staring at it, listening to the occasional creak of footsteps in the hallway. Eventually, out of sheer exhaustion, we both drifted off, but it was the kind of sleep that barely counts. You're resting, but your body is waiting. By the next morning, Rick was gone. Not at breakfast, not in the hallway. His door stayed shut all day. We figured maybe he'd gone on an excursion or just didn't want to be bothered. But that night, after dinner at the Italian place on deck 5, we returned to our room and something immediately felt wrong. Our door log, which the cruise app keeps for keycard tracking, showed 4 entries while we were gone. Brooke and I had both taken our cards. No one should have been inside. We stepped in and stood there for a few seconds, just looking around. Nothing obvious was missing, but our bags were different. Her suitcase was half-zipped. My shaving kit was on the bed, though I'd left it inside the bathroom drawer. Every zipper had been moved, every pocket opened. We called guest services immediately. A woman named Carla met us with a security officer about 15 minutes later. We showed them the app log, explained what had been moved, and mentioned the underwear from the day before. Carla looked genuinely concerned, especially when we said the keycard entries had happened while we were away. The officer scanned the door and confirmed what we already knew. It had only been opened with one of the 3 registered cards, mine, Brooke's, or Rick's. But Rick was supposedly assigned to a different block of cabins, according to their records. They had no one listed in the room next to us. Room 7147, where Rick had said he was staying, was marked as unoccupied from the start of the voyage. That hit us like a brick. I pulled out my phone and showed a picture Brooke had taken on the second day of the trip. Just a selfie of us on the balcony, and in the corner, if you zoom in, you can see Rick's arm resting on the railing next door. It wasn't much, but it proved he was real. Security took it seriously at that point. They opened the cabin next to ours and let us watch from the hallway. The room was empty, spotless, bed perfectly made, no luggage, no sign anyone had stayed there at all. But there was a faint smell, cologne maybe, something sharp and stale, and taped behind the bathroom mirror they found a folded napkin with numbers scribbled on it. No names, just numbers and one word. Observation. Security didn't give us much after that. They said they'd review hallway footage and escalate it, but we never heard back. We requested a cabin change, and to their credit, they moved us the same night to a room 2 decks down. We spent the last day of the cruise in a weird fog, too anxious to relax but unsure what to do. Brooke barely spoke, just kept checking her suitcase every few hours like something new might show up in it. I locked everything, every drawer, every latch. We never saw Rick again. No one matching his description ever turned up. We asked around, even showed his picture to Malik, and the guy just shook his head and said, "I haven't seen that man before." To this day, we have no clue who he was or how he ended up in a room the ship claims was empty. We changed all our passwords and tossed out half the clothes we brought just in case. We even reported the incident to the cruise line's corporate office, but they gave us a generic apology and a 15% discount on a future cruise, which we obviously never used. Brooke still triple checks every lock when we stay at hotels. As for me, I can't walk down a carpeted hallway with those soft yellow lights without thinking about Rick's door slightly ajar and wondering if he was ever really supposed to be there at all. When we booked the cruise, it felt like a reward. Just me and my best friend Vanessa, 7 days in the Caribbean. No parents, no professors, no emails. Just drinks, sun, and bad decisions. We'd just wrapped up our degrees from Arizona State, and that June felt like the first breath after 4 years of holding it in. Vanessa had always been the social one, louder than life, while I was the more cautious half of the duo. I'd never been on a cruise before. Honestly, I'd never even left the mainland. So when we stepped onto that massive ship in Fort Lauderdale, I was buzzing from more than just the champagne we'd split in the lift. Our cabin was tight but cozy, 2 single beds pushed into the corner, a tiny desk and a narrow closet with a mirrored door that made the whole room feel like a funhouse. We'd laugh every time we bumped into each other trying to get dressed. The first night went how you'd expect. Rum punches, a tacky dance floor, too much perfume in the air. We stumbled back to the room after midnight, tipsy and loud, and I remember Vanessa kicking the door shut and locking it. Deadbolt, handle lock, everything. I watched her do it. It was part of our routine, especially since the hallways creeped me out a little at night. They felt too quiet for how many people were on board. The second night, I woke up cold. Not just chilly, cold. The kind that makes your teeth clench and your shoulders tense without you realizing. I sat up in bed, confused, and that's when I noticed it. The cabin door was open. Not all the way, but cracked. Just enough to see the faint hallway light spilling in across the carpet. I froze. My first thought was that maybe Vanessa had gone out and forgot to close it properly, but she was in her bed, mouth slightly open, breathing steady. I got up slowly, pushed the door shut, locked it again, and just stood there for a second, trying to shake that weird knot in my stomach. The next morning, I told her. Vanessa just blinked at me, still brushing mascara off her lashes, and said something like, "Girl, you probably forgot to lock it after we got in." But I know I didn't. I hadn't even had that much to drink. Still, I let it go. It's easy to second-guess yourself when you're in an unfamiliar place, right? But things kept getting off. A bracelet I knew I'd packed was gone from the nightstand. My lipstick was missing. Vanessa laughed it off at first. "You're a mess, you probably left it in the bathroom downstairs." But I hadn't. I'd used that lipstick right before bed. I remembered setting it beside the charging port. By the fourth night, I was double-checking everything. I started taking pictures of my stuff before bed, just to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. I didn't tell Vanessa about that part. She already thought I was overthinking, and I didn't want to start an argument on what was supposed to be a celebration. That night, I took a picture of the vanity area, zipped up my purse, locked the cabin door myself, and even wedged one of my sneakers in front of it. Not enough to keep it from opening, but enough that if it moved, I'd know. We went to the upper deck for a movie night and stayed out late. When we came back, everything looked normal. But the sneaker had shifted a few inches to the left. I didn't sleep well. Every sound felt sharper, like my brain was on high alert. Around 2 a.m., I woke up again, this time with that heavy kind of stillness you can feel in the air. Vanessa was snoring softly. I stayed frozen, eyes half open, listening. That's when I heard it. The faintest metallic click. Then the doorknob turned. Slowly, deliberately, not jiggling, not confused, like someone who knew exactly how to open it. I barely breathed. Whoever it was didn't come in, though. The knob turned, stopped, and then nothing. I waited for what felt like forever before I finally got up and checked. The door was locked again, just like I'd left it. But my sneaker? It was on the other side of the room. The next morning, I told Vanessa everything. The handle, the sneaker, the lipstick. She finally stopped brushing me off. Her face went pale, and she admitted that her headphones had disappeared a couple nights ago. But she didn't want to say anything because she figured she'd just dropped them somewhere on the pool deck. We went straight to guest services, told them someone had a copy of our keycard and had been coming into our room at night. The woman behind the counter kept a polite smile, but I saw her eyes flicker. She said she'd report it and have security check the logs and offered to move us to another room. We took it, obviously. They gave us a room 2 floors up, same layout but on the opposite side of the ship. We packed fast and were out of there in under 20 minutes. I didn't sleep much that night either, but at least nothing happened. The next morning, we went back down to the original cabin just to grab the rest of Vanessa's stuff from the closet. When we got there, the cleaning crew was already inside. I stepped in first and stopped cold. On the pillow of my old bed, someone had left my missing bracelet, just sitting there, coiled neatly, like it had never been gone. I didn't touch it. I just stood there staring because I knew that bracelet had been gone for days. Vanessa came in behind me and froze too. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The room was spotless otherwise, like no one had ever stepped foot in it since we left. But that bracelet, it was placed too deliberately, too perfect, not tossed, not forgotten. It felt like someone was saying, "I was here. I'll always be here." I told the cleaning lady about it, asked if she'd found it while tidying up. She just shook her head and said she hadn't even started on that bed yet. Later that afternoon, a guy from security actually called me to follow up. He said they checked the digital keycard logs for our old room. He sounded uneasy, said there were no entries between midnight and 7 a.m. on any of the nights we were there, other than ours. No master keycard, no employee access, nothing. That didn't make sense. I asked if it could be a malfunction or a bypass, and he got quiet for a second before saying, "That's not supposed to be possible, ma'am." He thanked me for the report and said someone from management would reach out. No one ever did. Vanessa and I didn't talk much for the rest of the trip. We stuck to crowded spaces, avoided the cabin during the day, and kept the new room double-locked every night. Nothing else went missing. No more strange noises or moved objects. But the whole vibe between us changed after that. Like we both knew something had happened that we couldn't make sense of, and it had shaken us in completely different ways. She got more jumpy, more defensive. I went quiet. We used to joke about that cruise being our last wild hurrah before adulthood. I didn't think it'd feel so literal. When we got back to Arizona, I boxed up the clothes I wore on that trip and haven't touched them since. I haven't seen Vanessa in months either. We text now and then, but I can feel the distance. And that bracelet? I left it on the ship, still sitting on that pillow when we disembarked. I don't know if someone had a copy of our keycard, or if someone never left that room to begin with, but I do know one thing. That cabin door was locked from the inside, every time. I'm James, 36, and this happened about 7 months ago on a cruise I took with my younger sister, Nicole. She'd just finalized a rough divorce, 7 years with a guy who slowly isolated her from everyone, and I figured a trip might help her remember who she is outside of that mess. I covered most of the cost, and booked us side-by-side balcony cabins on a mid-tier cruise ship leaving from Galveston. I'd never cruised before, and I was honestly more excited than I should have been. My job's all deadlines and meetings. This felt like the first real break I'd had in years. The ship had that weird corporate warmth vibe, always clean, too bright in the mornings, with synthetic floral carpet that gave off static every time I walked in socks. The first few days were smooth. Nicole seemed lighter, she laughed more, wore her hair down, started chatting with strangers at the buffet. We'd do our own thing during the day, then meet for drinks at sunset, talking across our balcony rails. Our cabins were technically separate, but close enough that we could hear each other if we leaned out. We watched the ocean slip by and pointed out distant cargo ships like we were 5 years old again. The rhythm of the waves, the glow of the moon, those nights had this calming repetition to them, like the ship was trying to lull you into forgetting the outside world existed. On the fourth night, just past 3 a.m., I woke up to heavy, panicked knocking on my cabin door. I knew it was Nicole before I even looked through the peephole. She knocked like she was trying to warn me, not just get in. She was barefoot, trembling, her oversized sleep shirt twisted around her. She didn't even wait for me to ask, just walked past me and said, "Someone was on my balcony." Her face was colorless, like she'd been holding her breath. Tried to stay calm, asked her if she was sure, and she said yes. She'd woken up to someone standing just beyond the glass, not moving, not knocking, not trying to open the door, just watching her. I stood there in silence for a second, half asleep and trying to logic my way through it. Maybe someone was drunk and wandered onto the wrong balcony. Maybe she imagined it. She hadn't been sleeping well, and she mentioned earlier that the constant motion of the ship was messing with her head. But she was insistent. "His shoes made this scuff sound," she said, "like when you drag rubber soles across that outdoor tile." I walked over to her room with her, heart racing just enough to make me alert. Nothing on the balcony, no sign of forced entry. The glass door was locked from the inside. I still remember how loud the engine hum felt in that silence. It filled the air like static you can't turn off. I convinced her to sleep in my room that night, which wasn't ideal. Those cruise beds aren't exactly built for two adults who toss and turn, but she didn't argue. The next morning, I stopped by guest services to ask if any balconies had security cameras. Turns out they only have cameras in the hallways and common areas, nothing pointing at the balconies. The guy at the desk was polite, but didn't seem concerned. "Probably just someone having a little too much fun," he said, like Nicole hadn't been scared out of her mind. That kind of dismissiveness got under my skin. I didn't like how easy it was for him to brush it off, but I didn't push. I didn't want Nicole to feel like she was overreacting, even if I was starting to think maybe she wasn't. That evening, we skipped our usual drink on the balcony. Nicole kept glancing sideways at her curtain like it might move on its own. Around midnight, she said she wanted to try sleeping in her own bed again, just to feel normal. I offered to stay in her room. She hesitated, then agreed. We kept the glass door locked, curtains drawn tight, and I even pushed one of the lounge chairs in front of the door. Not that it would have stopped anyone, but it gave us both something to focus on. I turned off the lights, lay down on the second bed, and scrolled my phone in the dark, the dim screen flickering across the ceiling while Nicole's breathing settled into that half-sleep rhythm. At exactly 2:44 a.m., I know because I checked my phone. I saw the curtain closest to the glass door ripple. It wasn't wind. The AC vent was on the other side of the room. It moved like someone had pinched the fabric and let go. I sat up, heart immediately punching against my ribs. Nicole hadn't noticed. She was still asleep. I walked quietly toward the curtain, reached out slowly, then yanked it open. The balcony was empty. No sound but the steady churn of the ocean below. I stepped out barefoot, trying not to make a sound, even though my breathing was loud in my own ears. I looked left. Nothing. Looked right. Just that thin metal divider separating her balcony from the next one. That's when I noticed it. The gap between the divider and the rail wasn't flush like I thought. There was a narrow space, maybe 10 inches wide, just enough for someone to squeeze through if they turned sideways. I crouched to inspect it and saw faint shoe marks, scuffed dirt streaks like someone had been bracing a foot on the rail while ducking through. My stomach dropped. The cabin next to hers had looked empty all week, curtains drawn, lights off. I stood there staring at that gap, while the wind brushed cold against my arms. There was no way this was just some drunk guest. Whoever it was had done it more than once, and they'd never tried to open the door or say anything. They just stood there, watching. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I just sat by the balcony door, lights on, eyes locked on that stupid curtain, waiting for the slightest movement. Nicole stayed asleep somehow, probably sheer exhaustion, but my mind kept running laps. Who the hell crawls between balconies night after night just to stare? What were they getting out of it? The next morning, I went straight to guest services again. I told them everything, every last detail. And this time, I didn't care about sounding paranoid. The woman at the counter raised her eyebrows when I said I saw scuff marks between the balconies. She typed something into her computer, gave a tight smile, and said she'd notify security. Later that afternoon, I got a call to come meet with the ship's security officer. He walked me through the hallway camera footage. Nothing unusual. Nicole's hallway, where our rooms were, only showed us coming and going. No one else. Then I asked him about the room next to hers, the one I thought was empty. He pulled up the records. That cabin had been unoccupied the entire cruise. No check-in, no access logs, no cleaning services logged inside after departure. Just vacant. I felt a cold wave crawl over me. I asked if staff ever entered for maintenance, and he shook his head. It's flagged for interior repairs, sealed since before departure. That didn't make any sense. I'd seen footprints. I'd seen that curtain move. Nicole had seen someone, twice. Unless someone was accessing it from outside, like climbing balconies in the dark, there was no way someone should have been on that balcony. The ship's exterior railings are curved and slick. You'd have to be borderline insane or incredibly agile to risk that kind of fall. I asked if they'd be checking the room just to be sure, and he said yes, but I never got a follow-up. I didn't press it. Nicole was already packing, her hands shaking every time she zipped a compartment. We both knew we weren't going to enjoy the rest of the cruise. That night we slept in my cabin with both balcony doors locked and blocked. Every creak, every bump of the ship made me flinch. We disembarked 2 days later and flew straight home. Nicole hasn't stepped foot on another cruise since. I don't blame her. I probably won't either. Sometimes I think about that moment, the one where I saw the curtain move, and wonder if I'd opened it a second later. Would I have seen a face staring back? A body halfway through that narrow gap? There's something about that silence, that stillness. It was like whoever was out there didn't want to break it, like watching us was enough. I still think about it when I wake up in the middle of the night and feel the dark pressing against my bedroom windows. It's different from fear. It's more like a hum in the background, a knowing. Nicole and I talked about it once, months later, and she said something that stuck with me. "He didn't want in," she whispered. "He wanted to be seen." And honestly, that might be the part that scares me the most.